What's going on, everybody, and welcome to day 20 of our Juniper Networking series. In today's video, we will be talking about VRRP, or Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. Now, VRRP allows us to have redundant gateways within our network, and we want redundancy within our network in general. We want to eliminate as many single points of failure as possible. As we know, when our devices or our end devices, such as our computers or printers, if they need to communicate outside of the network, they are going to need to communicate with the default gateway. But if the default gateway goes down, what happens? Well, in the case of VRRP, we're going to have redundant default gateways. So if our master gateway goes down, our backup is going to take over as the master. And then our PCs are not going to even know about this because they're going to be using a virtual IP address as their default gateway. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this lab on VRRP, or Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. Alright, so right now we're plugged into our middle switch and we want the GE000 and also the GE001 interfaces to both operate as layer 2 switch ports. So let's go ahead and log in. Let's do a CLI. Alright, and let's do a show interfaces terse to make sure that those two interfaces, which they are operating in the family protocol of Ethernet switching. So that is what we want. So now let's go ahead and plug into our top and bottom switches and configure the GE000 interfaces on both of those to have the IP addresses and also the virtual IP addresses that we're going to use to set up VRRP. So let's go ahead and plug into our top switch. Okay. And we want to configure this top switch to have a priority of 150. So that is the priority that we're going to configure on the VRRP group that we create. All right. So now we are in operational mode. Let's do an edit and go in configuration mode. All right. And we want to set our GE000 interface. So let's do a set interfaces. GE000 unit 0 family inet, and let's configure the address on this interface to be 192.168.1.4 /24, and let's do a VRRP group, and we want to do a VRRP group of, let's just do 99, and we want to do a virtual address of 192.168.1.1, and the priority that we want to put on this interface is 150. Let's hit enter there. And let's do a show pipe compare. Alright. So we're going to be putting this IP address on the GE000 interface. We're going to configure the VRRP group of 99. We have the virtual IP address of 192.168.1.1. And the priority is 150. So that is the changes that we want to make here. So let's do a commit and quit. Alright, so that commit was successful. So let's go ahead and plug into our bottom switch, and we're going to configure the priority on that switch to be 200. So our bottom switches should operate as our master switch. And as we know, VRRP preemption is enabled by default. So we're going to be looking at that later on in the lab. So let's go ahead and plug into our bottom switch and configure its VRRP configuration. All right, let's log in. All right, let's do a CLI. All right, let's do an edit. And let's do a set interfaces, GE000 over on this interface as well. Unit 0. Family inet address, and we want to configure its IP address to be 192.168.1.6. Let's do 1.6 /24. Let's do a VRRP group of 99. The virtual IP address, we have to configure it to be the same as the other virtual IP address. So we use 192.168.1.1, and we want to do a priority of 200 on this router, and let's do a commit and quit. Alright, so that commit was successful. So let's run some commands and see if this bottom switch is our master in our VRRP group. So let's do a show VRRP summary. And right now, we can see that it is actually in the init state, so it's still coming up. Oh, I did this in the last lab. We have not made the physical connections. So let's make the physical connections and then see what happens. And that is why you run these commands, because sometimes you look at the output and you can tell right away what is going on. As soon as I looked at the output, I'm like, yeah, I didn't make the connections. So, all good. That's what happens sometimes when you are just typing at the CL line, you forget to make the actual connections. So let's do that. Make sure you guys can see this as well. Turn the camera a little bit. There we go. Alright, so now let's rerun this command. Yep, so our bottom switch is our master. We can see the IP addresses over here. We can see that our interface is now up, and that's the reason how I knew that we didn't make the physical connections. I seen that. Let's do another command. Let's do a show VRRP detail. Right here we got a lot more information. We can see the IP address that was configured on this actual interface. We can see right here that the VRRP group is configured on our GE000 interface. We can see the version of VRRP that we're running, which is 2. We can see our interface state is up. We can see our group number of 99, our state of master. Our VRRP mode is active. We can see the priority right here, which is 200. And we can see a lot more information down here. Okay, so now let's plug back into our top switch and look at some of its output. Alright, so let's do some similar run commands over here. Let's do a show VRRP group, VRRP summary, sorry. And we can see that the top switch is acting as our backup. So if our bottom switch was to go out, the default gateway was to go out, this top switch right here would take over as the master. So we would not have any downtime in our networking. And as we know, if our devices go down for some reason in the network, information can be lost, money can be lost. So we want to keep the network as available as possible. All right, we can also see the interface right here, GE000. We can see the state is up. Let's do a show VRRP detail. And we got a lot more similar output here. We can see the physical interface is configured on is GE000. We can see the IP address that we configured on the interface, which is .4. We can see the version again over here, our group number, our state, which is backup. And the one thing that I wanted to look at, I said earlier in the video that preemption does happen by default. It is enabled by default with VRRP. So let's check that out. Let's do an edit. And let's do this. Since we know that this one is operating as the backup, let's change the priority. Let's do a set interfaces GE000 unit 0 family inet address. It was 192.168.1.4/24. The VRRP group that we configured was 99. The virtual IP address that we configured was .1, so 192.168.1.1. And let's configure a high priority over here of 240. And let's do a commit and quit. Alright, so that commit was successful. So we configured a high priority now on the top switch. So now let's see if that switch is now the master. Let's do a show VRRP summary. And now we can see that our top switch is now the master. So that is an example of preemption in real time. So if you guys are coming from a Cisco background, you probably heard of HSRP or Hot Standby Routing Protocol. But VRRP is vendor agnostic, so you can use it on Juniper, Cisco, and other vendors as well. So I appreciate you guys tuning in to day 20 of our Juniper Networking series. I hope to see you in day 21. But until then, peace out.